Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. My name is Joshua Gibson. I am your host, and I am joined today by a very special guest, the head coach of Philadelphia Barbell Club, Jim Rutter. How's it going, Jim?
Good. It's going great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. And I'm not, I kind of had this little string of shows where I bring on coaches from clubs in the U.S. who have had a lot of success and produced a lot of very good athletes, but also just developed like really, really high quality clubs. So as we kind of get into that idea of building a successful club, building successful athletes, I'd like to even know how you ended up getting into weightlifting in the first place.
It's a funny story. I never, I grew up in the 80s, and so the Summer Olympics were the biggest deal every 4 years because, patriotism was pretty high at that time. And myself and all my friends, that's what we would do in the summers. We would, and then we would get into swimming and diving and stuff like that because Greg Louganis was huge. And there's some big name swimmers back then, and the cyclists, of course. And I had no idea weightlifting was a sport until 2000. And I was bartending, and it was pretty late on like a Sunday. And somebody had ESPN on, and the weightlifting came on. And I was like, what the hell is this? I'd never seen a snatch or clean and jerk, even though like we were like, because track and field and swimming and gymnastics and the diving, that was huge to us growing up, especially, like the track and field. And so it came on, and I was like, this is really cool. And I'd played college football, and then in my 20s, I got into powerlifting a little bit, but I, no idea what a snatch or clean and jerk was, even though I'd inadvertently done tons of power cleans to put weight on my shoulders for a strict press.
Right.
But, no idea that was like a movement that was contested in any sport. And so this is in 2000. This is, I guess, July or August. And so I said, well, I got to get into this. And there's no Google back then. The internet is not primitive, but it's not what it is today. So it took like 3 months to find a coach. But once I did, I just started. Because I ordered a book from, again, no Amazon either, I don't think. Or if it was like in its infancy. I ordered a book on like the Olympic lifts, and I tried to teach myself. But I was like, this is never going to happen. I'm just going to get hurt. So I found a coach who was probably like 45 minutes to an hour away from where I was living at the time in Pennsylvania. And I started driving up to see him. His name was Frank Bisaccia. He still coaches. He's a master's lifter. And that's where I got started in 2000. So I competed. I got decent, 31 and 73. Nothing spectacular. Did a couple AO finals. Qualified for nationals a couple times. I enjoyed doing the Arnold. That was a fun meet always. And then I started coaching in 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
At a CrossFit gym.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and it's just the nature of where we're at in this point in time. A lot of people don't realize like the difficulty of finding a club or finding a coach well before the internet, well before kind of the proliferation of weightlifting clubs in the U.S. So I've had conversations with like Artie Dressler, and he mentions teaching himself to split clean by looking at images, and he was like, "Yeah, I thought you just started in the split position, and that's how you ended up there." So I can't even imagine trying to navigate that space. And other coaches have mentioned there's like Jim Schmitz and Cali, and then there's like John Thrush. So it's like you kind of have to there's East Coast Golds. You kind of had to travel a lot. Weren't many options. What ultimately inspired you or motivated you to get into coaching in 2010?
Honestly, it was economics of a very weird sort. I got rid of my car that year. I live in Philadelphia. I was living in South Philadelphia at the time, where I still live, but I moved around a little bit. And I got rid of my car. And so I was like, all right, because before that, I was still competing for East Coast Gold. And I was driving to their Morristown, New Jersey facility 5 or 6 times a week, which is about a half hour away, depending on traffic. And I get rid of my car, and I'm like, well, I need to find somewhere to train in town. So I went to Google, which now existed, and I just typed in Olympic weightlifting Philadelphia. And the top 5 results were CrossFits. So I was like, all right, I have no idea what CrossFit is, but I'm going to reach out to them. And I said, hey, listen, I have a lot of equipment. I have 10 years experience. What would you charge me to just come in during your open gym time and have a place to train? And I'll leave all my equipment there and, 2 sets of squat racks, 2 barbells, tons of bumpers. It's like you and your athletes can all use it. And only one of those people I reached out to, well, that's not true. One person reached out in a positive way. Like got back to me. Another person got back to me in a way that was like a little off-putting. So I didn't follow up with that too much. But so CrossFit Center City, which is now rebranded, they got back to me. The owner was super enthusiastic. She was young. Her name was Erin Davidson. And she said, hey, can you, come in whenever you want and we'll talk. So I came in and she was like, yeah, this is great. Like the first day I met her, she was so like open and warm-hearted. She just gave me a key. She didn't want to charge me anything. She just asked if I would personally let her train with me so she could learn how to do this. And I was like, sure. And that went on for about 6 months. And then they moved to a bigger space where they had a basement. And she was like, how would you feel if, like this is in 2011 now, and she said that one of her New Year's goals was to do a weightlifting meet. And she said, how would you feel about taking about 10 weeks and coaching myself and the coaching staff, and we'll all do a local meet that's in May or whenever it was. And I was like, that would be awesome. I've never done that, but I'll give it a shot. And from programs, I was still with East Coast Gold at the time, and from programs that I had from them, I kind of assembled and then modified what, be based on their training level and their experience. I mean, they were all, 3 of them were very good CrossFit athletes. With decent, back squats as well. But the other couple, didn't have really much, the back squat is not one of CrossFit's foundational movements. Mm-hmm. So they needed more experience with that. So I created something for them, and we all went and did this meet. And it was a big success. And at the time, I'm still working as a full-time writer and editor. So I was doing this at night from like 6:30 to 8:30, 4 days a week, or 3 days a week, and then Saturday mornings. And then also trying to train myself. And she's like, hey, what if we do this again, but this time we let the general membership fill it up and you can earn some extra money? And I was like, all right, that sounds interesting, because like freelance writing is, the editing job I had was with a company. The writing was freelance. And I think any freelance writer, editor will tell you, copywriter, that if you're doing a lot of gig work, it's challenging to piece together a regular income. So, the notion that, hey, I could earn a few $100 extra a month was, appealing to me. And so I was like, all right, let's do this. So they limited it to like 8 people for every hour and a half session. And they're going to do 2 of those sessions now. So 6:30 to 8 and 8:15 and 9:45 or whatever. 3 nights a week plus Saturday. So that filled up right away. And she gave me, I think, almost all of what she charged them. And then they all went and did a meet. And then she's like, how would you feel if we started a barbell club? And I was like, that sounds pretty good too. And by the middle of the next year, I'm still writing a lot for local publications, including the Philadelphia Inquirer. But I was able to pare back the editing a lot because she had grown her gym at this time to close to 200 members. And in Center City, they're paying a good amount. So she's able to give me a salary and benefits. So I'm like, all right, this is something I can do. And then it grew from there.
Yeah.
And
Was that something where obviously being able to be housed under a really successful business in the same industry and develop underneath that, were there things that you kind of picked up from her ability to grow the gym, develop it into that? Like, were there things you picked up that you were able to take into Philadelphia Barbell Club when you did your own thing?
probably
Mm-hmm.
not consciously. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
For a long time, I would have said that I was a terrible business person. I think a lot of weightlifting coaches could also make the same statement about themselves. I have since, over the past couple of years, since I got my own facility, um, I have worked a lot at improving that aspect of my skill set. And I would recommend people starting out. There's a great club in Pennsylvania called 1440 Athletics, and that guy, he's 26, 27. He's Miranda Olrai's coach. I'm probably not saying her name right. She went to Youth Worlds last year
Mm-hmm.
and medaled. He's a whiz at that stuff. He has a great business acumen, and I am only just kind of coming along in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think from the CrossFit, I don't know. It really just took off. We went middle of 2012, 15 members. Middle of 2013, 45 members. To the point where I am coaching legitimately full time. Sessions in the morning, my training after that, 1 or 2 sessions in the afternoon, 1 session in the evening, 4 days a week, plus sessions on Saturday. You know? When I got out on my own, so after that, I went to another CrossFit where I founded Philadelphia Barbell, and then a year and a half later, I left there and opened my own space. Yeah, it took me a while to pick up the business side of things. The coaching side of things, I've grown and evolved over time, but the focus has always been on the development of each individual athlete.
Mm-hmm.
We while people train at like last night, Tuesday, it's one of our busiest nights, and we have 15 platforms, and at 6:30, all 15 were filled, and 2 people were in the accessory room we have warming up to get ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the focus has always been to develop the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think there are different aspects to a weightlifting coach, and you mentioned that some coaches can coach athletes well. Some coaches think of themselves more as like a programming coach. Some coaches think of themselves more as like a competition coach. Some coaches may think that they're like great at the business side of things and can really excel at that. Is someone like yourself who had to kind of bring up all aspects kind of at the same rates, did you find that it was kind of as you developed, as you got more experience, more exposure to athletes, things kind of like leveled up at the same rate? Or were there aspects of it that you struggled with? Starting in a CrossFit gym, you probably had more time to devote to athletes and understanding the programming and whatnot. And then as you transition more into your own space, it became more of a focusing on the business side of things. Were there things you struggled with at first that you do really well now, and vice versa?
Yes, but again, I think that like any, as you're getting into things and learning, I think that initially you're not always aware of your blind spots and your weaknesses. And as your strengths go, you learn what you're not doing well at the same time. And so in that regard, I think that I was able to that was kind of the way in which I understood what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the great thing about starting in a CrossFit for me was that I was immediately exposed to. I mean, this woman had, like I said, 200 athletes in her club, and in addition to like the sessions of just barbell club I was teaching, I think it was 1 or 2 days a week. We also had a weightlifting for CrossFit class, during which one class we work on the snatch, one class to clean and jerk, and then accessory movements afterwards. So I immediately got to work with athletes of a wide variety of backgrounds. I mean, we had one kid who had been a collegiate wrestler, and he was like a stud athlete. We had another person, the first person I coached to any national medals. This kid had done skateboarding, but he was super explosive, and he had a great kinesthetic awareness. It's funny, he's actually eligible for Masters for the first year this year, and so I of course messaged him and said, hey, are you going to do Masters Nationals? And he's a successful he's actually a pharmacist now out in California. He was going to Temple University because they have a good pharmacy school, but he's kind of out of the sport. But it was just like, I got to work with all these different types, and I got to experiment a lot, if that makes sense. Because you would get people in. Like, I had one girl, she was from Saint Martin, the French island in the Caribbean, and she had done BMX and motocross down there. And so just again, like an incredible mental toughness, but not a lot of skill with like an implement, other than it didn't have two wheels on it. So I got to do a lot of figuring out what kind of things worked early on, and then again with those weightlifting for CrossFit classes, I had to come up with a good teaching model that enabled people with no barbell experience or just a CrossFit barbell experience to improve at the lifts at a rate that could be achieved with me only seeing them twice a week. So, and now I'm so I recently just got approved to be a USAW level 1 instructor. But my personal teaching model is definitely different, with a lot of overlap, of course, because the lifts are the lifts. But if I have a brand new lifter come into my gym, I have a teaching model for the movements that I've been practicing for about 9 years now. So that was one of the great things of starting in that kind of environment. The thing that I think took me a while to really pick up, and this is just, I don't know how to explain this. I initially viewed it as like a personal failing, but I don't any longer. It was just part of learning. When we moved into the space we currently inhabit in January of 2017, I knew that one of the things I wanted to change the most was treating the environment and my job with a much greater professionalism. I would say when I was at the CrossFits, and CrossFits kind of lend themselves to a more community-oriented, collegial, some people might say bro-y type atmosphere, but I knew I wanted to move away from that and treat it more like a sport, and that this was a training facility for the sport. And again, I know I've talked to other coaches about this. Danny Camargo has been a big help in this regard. He and I have had many talks about athletes being on their cell phones a lot, and that's fine, but if I'll just say that in contrast, one of the greatest compliments I got about my club was we had a coach from Italy come in, and he wanted to just see our gym and experience a couple sessions. And he, we definitely discourage talking while people are lifting. Horseplay is not tolerated. Most of the lifters come in and they stay focused throughout the entirety of their snatch and clean and jerk. And then if they're on to squats or pulls or accessory, if you want to have conversations, then please go ahead. But the Italian coach who dropped in, he said, this reminds me very much of the National Training Hall in Italy. He said everyone is very disciplined and very focused, and I thought, wow, that was a great compliment. Because while there are a number of things that have helped with the success that we've been fortunate to have as a club, I would say that that's a main contributor. It's the facility is a place to train in the sport. Sessions are practices for the sport. You support your teammates because even though you compete individually, you are going to be part of a team that is going to big meets. And as a result, I think it's kind of elevated at least everyone's focus. There was a little pushback at first. I don't mind saying that. It was never bad. It was just kind of like, wow, is this really what we're going to do kind of thing. But it also, it forced me to become better in a lot of ways. And, that doesn't mean I didn't make more missteps along the way. I certainly did. But it was a change that I remember really shaping things up. And a big demarcation from what it had been before.
Yeah,
so,
I would honestly, I'd love to dig more into that. And I think I kind of mentioned, when I was posing the question, there are different aspects to coaching that coaches think they're better or worse at. The technical side of things, the programming, the competition coaching, the business side of things, etc. And without passing over it, you mentioned your teaching model, and I think we've had a few coaches on who have kind of brushed on it. But not gone into detail. Could you maybe talk about how what you do would differ from what you could call tradition or the standard approach to teaching the lifts? Because this podcast, it doesn't have a huge following, but the people who listen to it are dedicated, consistent coaches, athletes who really care about what they do. So I think it could be really useful.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so there are many lifters in my club that almost never power clean. And there are a subset of that who almost never power snatch. So my teaching model, when I get a new athlete, as long as they can safely overhead squat, I immediately teach the full snatch. From positions, of course. I use a modified pen lay, top-down method. His videos are very helpful, by the way, for anybody looking for resources on this. But I teach it in stages from the top down. I do teach the muscle snatch from the hip because I believe that the athletes need to understand the upper body contribution that is, and again, like, there can be reasons why that's not good for why athletes aren't good at that part, the upper body pull under the bar. But I start there and I work there a lot. Like, we do a lot of hip and high hang snatches, whatever, however people refer to them. I know Penlay just use positions 1, 2, and floor. So we work top down a lot so that, by the time an athlete, like, again, if this is a beginner coming into the club, 6 months in, they've done the least amount of snatching from the floor. And then we work on rectifying that and flipping that. But they definitely understand how to use the legs and how to connect that into the upper body. I don't want to call it a pull, but contribution to the movement and the lockout. And then once an athlete is training, like, again, if it's everything it's going to sound crazy to people who have big clubs. Like, we have about 55 or 60 members. And every single one of those people who is, say, above a year training age gets an individual program that's designed to work on what they need worked on. So it's a lot of work at home. Like, this morning I got up at 6, and the first hour and a half of my day after I took my dog out for a walk and had my coffee, the first hour and a half was devoted to finishing up this week's programs. And I had about 18 to get done. And that's fine. I enjoy it. I think that's, if you mentioned that Dan Bell was curious what we're doing over here, and that's one of the things we do is, so like the people who do get power snatches, for instance, are the taller lifters. So Kristen Erickson, who's, I think, She vacillates between 87 and 87 plus, depending on the importance of the meet and what's where we're at in her training. She's 5'9", 5'10". So she power snatches at least once a week because she's really got to work on that big, long vertical finish and a very long pull up.
Mm.
And then I have and someone like John Morrow, who's a good 89, snatches 145, clean and jerk 70 plus. But also young, like in terms of training age, like he's 20. He just turned 21. He's only been doing this for a few years. I still give him power snatches for the same reason, because he's long and tallish for an 89. But I've had plenty of lifters, like Jessica Saxon, who is a really good 55 national champion. We almost never did power snatches. We worked on speed under the bar, getting the bar to the hip properly, not over pulling it high, being able to lock the bar out. So the teaching model is focused on getting people to understand how to be under the bar effectively. And by effectively, I, of course, mean with economy of movement, being efficient, not wasting energy, not over pulling, not having the bar crash. So in the clean also, we do a lot of cleans from the hip. We do muscle cleans from the hip again, but to reinforce what the upper body contribution is supposed to be. And those are usually light. Those might even be with the empty bar. And it might just be, hey, we're going to start off with 5 sets of 5. And this is what I'm teaching someone. And then once an athlete is seasoned or ready to start competing, we to keep working on that, we do a lot of hip cleans or cleans from position 1 or thigh block cleans, stuff like that. But again, it's all tailored. And along the way, there is tons of accessory movements to be done. I'm right now working with a young girl. Her name's Abby. She's great. She's 19. She was a former gymnast. She's one of the few non-CrossFit athletes that would come into my gym that already had a sufficient amount of upper body strength to move the bar properly.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to build that with her. She had to do things that were lift specific. Like we do a lot of snatch grip behind the neck push pressing at our club. We do a lot of snatch grip. We call them like cloak off rows, the rows that he does where he gets a little bit of kip and then he's really just focused on that big upper body pull to the sternum. So we do a lot of stuff like that. We do weighted pull-ups. We do dips. We do some strict pressing, but again, like a lot of that's just for bodybuilding, And then foundationally, again, depending on what the athlete needs, squats, pulls, RDLs, some deadlifting, not a lot. Yeah. I would say we do far more RDLs than deadlifts. Just because I think, again, maybe that's just tailored towards what our athlete population has stemmed from, which is still largely CrossFit. But you just, you get these athletes coming in with massive quadriceps and not as much hamstring development as weightlifting requires. So I think that kind of went a little off topic, but
no, that's perfect. I think honestly, it's there's a lot there. And I think if we're thinking about kind of the recipe of developing an athlete, there's obviously the ingredients, but then it's deciding on the amounts. So if you're saying, okay, here's the teaching, here are the exercises that improve their performance, then how are you figuring out kind of like the formulation of it to where you can dose it correctly to get improvements?
Okay, so that's kind of a multi-pronged approach. Number one is that if I get a new athlete, I have like a kind of strength profile questionnaire that I ask them to fill out. It's not unlike what Sean Waxman uses, and it was definitely influenced by. He has been relying on that kind of model for a long time. I remember first seeing it. We had a kid when I was still at the first CrossFit I was a part of. We had a young kid come in, and he was playing football for Occidental College out in Los Angeles, but he had gotten into weightlifting also, and he started training at Waxman's gym, and this is 2012, 2013-ish. And I remember seeing it for the first time then on Sean's website. And over time, I've added in things that I thought helped me adequately diagnose people that were in front of me. So once we start from there, and I kind of see how they move the bar, because you can see what hamstring development looks like just by putting the athlete in a squat position or asking them to just walk across the room in front of you, and you can see which athletes don't get a lot of glute contribution or which athletes have like shallow shoulders or that kind of like winged shoulder that you see in like ice hockey players or tennis players, but they have it, or rowers, but they have it on both sides because they've been crossfitting and they've been doing kipping pull-ups with not optimal technique for a long time, and now they're very forward and they have a kind of bit of upper cross syndrome. So you know what needs to be evened out in certain ways. But when I see them move the bar and I can tell, all right, well, you're right into the front of your foot even with a stick. So try to stay planted. If they can't stay planted, well, then you know that they need certain things. And then I kind of, whereas Sean, he, to my knowledge, and I hope I'm not misquoting him here or misunderstanding him, but he uses his strength profile to see where the lifts are in proportion to the strength work. And I would say we do it kind of almost the opposite. I look at where the strength is in proportion to the lifts, because my general understanding, again, and this is, I'm trying to give another prong in the approach now, is that you have to treat, in my opinion, my approach, I'm not going to say opinion, I'll say my approach anymore, is that you have to treat the athlete as a total organism. And they can't have any one part that is too weak to perform the lifts optimally based on their strength levels. So if they don't have hamstring development, we have a hamstring curl machine. We do a lot of RDLs. We do a lot of Nordic curls. We do a lot of like partner assisted work. If they can't, again, they can't be limited by their weakest part if we can address it. Does that make sense? Like, obviously everybody's going to be limited by their weakest part. In the back squat, the person who gets stuck midway, well, your glutes are not contributing as much as they need to. And that's your weakest part for now. But over time, you hope that gets better and better and better. So I treat the athlete as best I can as a total organism. And I just say organism because using the word like body is confusing or insufficient. And from there, I build the accessory lifts that I believe they need to not only become stronger, but to rectify those strength imbalances. And then over time, because this is prong number 3 now, technique takes time. Strength takes time. You're going to improve your technique by doing lots of reps from 70 to 85%, no matter what stage you're at as an athlete. I know that the more you get into it, the more that shifts upward towards 85%. I had a great conversation with Yasha at a meet, maybe in the past couple of years, and his gym is Marin Heavy Athletics. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And he said, we're at 85% year round. And I was like, you know what? That's such a great way of putting things, because that's where the athletes mostly need to be. Maybe a little lower depending on the training age. But if you have, like, for instance, snatch from any position, and you're in my club and you've been doing this more than a year, on average, you're probably doing 30 reps per session. And you're probably snatching 5 days a week. Now, I know that by itself is not going to produce elite athletes. And I'd like to give it a contrast to that. I'm not drawing a blank on the guy's name, but I think he was Kyle Bruce's original coach down south somewhere. And he would, so 150 snatches a week, what's that, about 8,000 snatches a year, right? So he had his athletes training 5 sessions a week. He had his athletes training 9 sessions a week, doing just about that many. So now you're getting 15 to 18,000 snatches per year. That's where you're going to start producing elite athletes. It might have been Matt Bruce's original coach. I get them confused. I'll think of his name in a second. But in either case, the final maybe not the final, but the next step of that is almost exclusively every single athlete that I've been able to coach, with the exception of the school children, almost all of them have worked not just one full-time job, but side gigs as well. So Brianna Russo, she's semi-retired now because she's pregnant. She got married in May of last year, and I was very honored to officiate her wedding. She was a decent, I shouldn't say that. Can you edit that out?
Yeah.
She was a good 75/81. Did 97 and 125, cleaned 130. And the whole time she's training, she's a full-time educator. And she's also doing, she had like so many different side businesses. You know, she was helping do t-shirt printing. She was running a meal prep company for a year plus. She coaches CrossFit and weightlifting at different CrossFits. So I get her the 5 days I get her. And I'm with technique, like we're only going to get 150 snatch reps in per week. So what can I do to make that better? Well, I can make her fucking deadlift a lot. And I can make her squat a lot. And yes, is it ultimately going to be out of proportion to what she's moving? Certainly. But it's because she just doesn't physically have the time to put in more reps each week in the snatch or clean and jerk. But the strength that she does have is sufficient to enable progress and allow her to perform at competitions at her highest level every time. You know, almost all of her PRs were comp PRs. So that's a lot of it. There might be individual differences. You know, one of the things I've been trying to get much better at over the past year is I decided that, you know, again, with these athletes, you know, even though they have jobs and so forth, like they're all putting out money for like rehab and so forth, you know, to go see a PT. Now, some of them have like I don't want to say sponsorships, but assistantships because they help rep somebody's local, you know, office. But the next thing that I decided to try and get better at last summer after senior nationals was working with athlete on mindset development. You know, and I was thinking about this the other day, and it's like, you know, it's a lot, and I'm one person, and I have a great team manager. Her name is Abby. Also, all of her sons and her daughter have lifted for the club at various points. And she's a master's athlete, and she helps out a ton logistically, especially getting ready for big meets. And then I do have other people that help coach, and some of them, like Bree, for example, she runs the weightlifting program at Swarthmore College. She runs a weightlifting club at a CrossFit near her home, outside of the city. Other people like Kristen Erickson, she has a full-time job as an economist, and she was also coaching a weightlifting club at a CrossFit in Philadelphia. You know, so all these people work, and asking them to kind of like, oh, well, also here, go see this sports therapist, or also help contribute to the coaching at the club. Well, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, if I can improve a skill, and I think every coach would hopefully say this, but I do feel like with 95% of my lifters, I have a good rapport that's individuated to them. People don't always get everything they might want, but they get exactly what they need. You know, and that, you know, so some people need a little more tough love than others. Some people need a lot more encouragement than others. Some people need me to say, hey, listen, I just read this book. Here's 5 exercises from it. If you do these one a week over the next 5 weeks and you reinforce it as often as you can, this part is going to improve. You know, so it's like some people need that. And other people do ultimately need to have their own person to go talk to. And that's great too. But if I can, like, again, if I'm, looking at it from my profession is weightlifting coaching. So in order to make it as expansive as possible and fulfill that definition as much as I can, I'm going to try and get better at the things that are going to make my athletes better. That I might ultimately have to source out. Like, for instance, I am never going to go to physical therapy school. So when an athlete said, hey, this hurts, I do not hesitate to be like, listen, we have PTs that we work with. We have a PT in the club. Her name's Hope Walsh. She's fantastic. She's helped out tremendously since she's joined the club 2 years ago, and I can't thank her enough. And I don't think I am ever going to get a certification in nutrition. So most of the national team has somebody they work with in that regard. But the things that I can get better at and try and help out with, I'm going to work on trying to get better at them, So like there is a local sports psychologist who we have had come in, and since then I've been in touch with him and I schedule sessions with him where I try to learn how to do things better as a coach for the people that couldn't afford to go see him or don't have the time to go see him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does,
Yeah.
and I'm aware of the time limitation. So what we'll do is I'll just kind of ask questions and then let me know when we have about a minute, 2 minutes left, and then I can wrap up the show. But I'd like to get as much out of it as we can.
Yeah,
Because
certainly.
because there was a lot there, and I kind of want to just touch on a few other points before I get kind of like out of the coaching realm into the business realm. But you kind of mentioned a handful of times and I'll take these, one by one, but like you talked about the strength ratios and you talked about, kind of like with the teaching model, there are some things that you think are a little different or could be a little different and help inform training. So when you talk about strength ratios, and I'm sure you've seen, Waxman stuff and the commonly kicked around ratios, where do you diverge, or what's different for you that other coaches may not be considering?
Okay, so the ratios are great. They're a great base point. Should be able to clean and jerk 80 to 85% of your best back squat. That's great. And then there are people who are not naturally explosive athletes. And for them, that's never going to happen. You can make them do a lot more velocity training, and we do a lot of that. You can make them do more speed work in the back squat and front squat, and we do a lot of that. But if, I have people that I consider good weightlifters winning medals at national meets who are not primarily fast twitch athletes. I've had a few, and a lucky few, just like the first kid, the skateboarder kid that I talked about. Man, he came into the CrossFit, and one day they were doing standing broad jumps to warm up for deadlifts, and I'm watching him like bounding across the room in like 4 leaps, and I'm like, this kid's got to get up here and learn weightlifting, because he was like 5'2" or 5'3", and he had like a 10-foot standing broad jump.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of NFL crazy levels, right? So his ratios were going to be at those optimal levels that the Russians or the Soviets figured out, decades ago. And then the front squat, 107% of your best clean and jerk. Maybe if you're an expert clean and jerk, you know what I mean? Maybe if you've put 10 years into the sport, you're going to be at that level. But if I have somebody who's 27 starting with me and they're like, hey, I'd like to go to nationals. Well, that's going to happen on a shorter timeline if you get really strong first. So we devote a lot more of the training to it. I push that up first. And then again, talk about putting in reps. Well, your technique will improve with thousands of more reps on the bar. But you can hit those positions better if you also get stronger. You can learn how to accelerate the bar better. Again, look at the speed strength curve. We want to operate towards the sprinting end of the speed strength curve. But that whole curve shifts up the more your absolute strength improves. Now, that doesn't mean I want people doing slow squats. I don't want that at all. But it means that we're going to tolerate some slower squatting to accelerate progress with people, again, who come to me and they're like, I'm 27, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And that needs to happen before they get married at 32 and have a kid like Bree. Does that make sense? So it's like, so it's also the programming is also individuated based on timelines. I've got 3 youth athletes in my club right now, all of whom have medaled at youth nationals. We don't have to worry about that. They can get strong on proper time horizons. They can learn technique over proper time horizons. They can get to that point where, a kid who starts with me, like Abby's son Colin, who's medaled at the last 3 youth nationals, he started when he was 13, so by the time he is done being a junior, he'll have put in almost a decade. And his ratios will probably be correct at that point. Or we can at least operate on the assumption that they will be. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, like, with the ratios, like, on average, I would say we prioritize strength more, but it's because, the average age of our national medalists, at least over the past quad, was probably 30. Mm-hmm. And we had, those people enjoyed a lot of success. I had a woman, Morgan, who medaled at senior nationals in 2021 at the age of 34. Mm-hmm. She had medaled at AO finals, medaled at the nationals before that. It's like she has some time to keep putting in, but it's certainly not the time that a youth athlete has going into juniors, going into seniors, for whom those ratios were extrapolated. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like in the Soviet model, they had all these kids, and they worked with them, and then they worked with another batch, and then another batch, and then decades later, all of it's empirical. Those ratios don't have any basis. Mm-hmm. It's just like, ideally, this is what has worked best because we have 40 years of data, and we've extrapolated it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, like, again, I don't hold anybody to any particular ratio. I have had some athletes like Jess Franklin, who has been able to she snatched 100 at a time when her best back squat was 150.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. What are we operating at that? That's north of 7. That's almost 75%. Mm-hmm. That's not the way it's supposed to go when you have, allegedly, the ratio for an elite athlete is 65%. Kristen Erickson was the same way. I think she snatched 100 when she was back squatting in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And you also have to adjust all of that shit for the athlete's weight class. Mm-hmm. So like the back squat for an 87 or a super has got to be much higher, because when they're trying to clean and jerk 130 kilos, they also have to be moving all of their own body weight with it. Mm-hmm. And if you're not calculating that out in your ratios, I don't think you're making accurate adjustments in programming. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like I had a 48 who came very close to double body weight clean and jerk. She did 91 at 48, clean 97. Also the fastest female athlete I've ever worked with. Mm-hmm. And she didn't need a big back squat. Mm-hmm. She had lightning speed, and she only had to move, what are you moving in the snatch? You're moving what? The bar plus 75% of your body weight. Mm-hmm. So what's she moving? The bar plus 30 more kilos? Mm-hmm. Not as hard as a super who weighs 120 and has to move 90 more kilos plus the bar. Mm-hmm. So, all right.
Yeah, and then along with the strength ratios, I think, again, the idea that your technique can elevate you up to a point where you're kind of in line with, a squat or something like that. You talked about getting in enough reps, right? Getting in enough practice, and the more practice you can get over time, ideally, the better you would be. I know, you mentioned Sean Waxman. He takes a bit of a more kind of like what I would call like a stretched out approach, where it's like you have a snatch focused day. It's kind of more isolated. It's all snatch work, and then you have like a clean day, a jerk day. Maybe you have another snatch day, and then another clean and jerk day. And then you talked about snatching 5 times a week. So maybe you can talk about how you would create more frequency for the skill work. Whereas like some traditional models typically will snatch like once or twice a week.
Yeah, certainly. All right, so I would say on average, everyone who's going to senior nationals for our club trains 5 days a week. I'll just give an average split: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off, Friday, Saturday. Saturday is almost entirely strength work, but they start with work, positional work on whatever the weakest of those three movements are: snatch, clean, or jerk. So for most people, it's jerk. You know, jerk's the hard one. You know, I would say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, they're absolutely snatching. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're definitely doing some of them cleans. And then they have jerks as often as they can tolerate them. Just to work. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't be heavy. 70% is fine. Get more reps in. Work on your timing. Work on your force production. Work on your dip. You know? Like we do jerk dips. We do a lot of partial front squats from the box just to work on the jerk. You know, the jerk, again, it's Dane Miller and I mean, I talk to Dane all the time because he's up in Reading and that's not far. But, you know, he talks about how, in his experience, the athletes that are initially very good at the jerk are, on average, have tend to have a greater athleticism. And there's a lot of reasons. Like he has his reasons for believing that. I have different reasons for believing that. But like the jerk is, you know, requires so much precision in the dip drive. Like you've got to stay in that vertical column. And you have to produce a tremendous amount of force. You know, like you look at John Garhammer's research, you know how much force is required for the jerk. So we have to practice it. You know, and it's a lot. So I would say on average, you know, the people going to senior nationals for us are snatching 4 or 5 times a week, cleaning three times a week. I think that's sufficient. But doing jerks 3 or 4 times a week as well, not to mention squats, deadlifts, pulls, RDLs, upper body building, you know. So we do try to get in. And then you have people like Kristen, who for a long time trained 7 days a week. She's now finally taking a rest day, but it's because we've been able to change her training where a rest day is beneficial, because when it wasn't a rest day, it was come in and do a lot of muscle snatching, a lot of muscle cleaning from heights, you know, maybe some light front squats, you know, because she had, when she started, she came from shot put, and not shot put the way like Coach Mary came from it, where, you know, Coach Mary graduated from her school with a massive back squat, whereas the strength and conditioning coaches that Kristen had at Villanova College, they told her that a 225-pound back squat was sufficient for the shot put. So she would just, her strength training was just sets of 5 at that weight forever. You know, so she didn't, and she had ankle mobility issues from the jerk as well. Or not the jerk, from the shot put as well. So for a long time, like the stuff that she came in and did on that extra day was positional and mobility work. But it enabled her, you know, she started with us in 2017. She'd never done a snatch before, at least not a full snatch. But she snatched 90 for the first time in like 2018. And she's an economist, so she's very data oriented, keeps meticulous training records. She's snatched 90 kilos or more over 1,000 times since then. You know, so she's put in a lot of reps now at a high percentage of her best snatch, which is 103 and 105 for the boxes. And so now we can scale back a little more, you know, and just, come in and hit some triples at 90, come in, hit some triples at 95 from the thigh blocks, stuff like that. And now let's get you to be healthy and get you to be recovered better and stuff like that. And that's, again, I get to touch on this when I was explaining like the training, but the nice thing about work capacity is that you can really develop it over time. And so that's another focus that we have is like, when I get somebody brand new, like I had this kid, Owen, he just joined the club. He played 4 years of baseball at Haverford College, which is apparently a good baseball college, but it's D3. And he started, we did 3 days a week. We did that for like 6 months. Now we're doing 4 days a week, And over time, like somebody like him, well, now I want to build up their work capacity within those 4 sessions. And we'll do that for 6 months. And now we'll add a 5th day, but we'll spread it all out, And again, none of this is new. Like I learned this stuff. Like my first training mentor was John Brose, oddly enough, because the book that I wrote dealt with his success with Pat Mendez. But John was somebody that I had looked up to for a long time as a weightlifter and for somebody who was doing interesting things. And I, talk to him at meets and call him up and ask him questions. And, this is kind of, we actually brought him out to, when I was at the first CrossFit, we brought him out for some seminars. And, I learned a lot from him. And then, I've had 2 other coaching mentors since then, all of whom have been very helpful towards me. And I still regularly try to talk to people at big meets or schedule Zoom sessions with them and pay them money to learn from them. For me, I don't ever want to think I have all the answers that I need for success, because that's that's not my mindset, and B, that's not going to help my athletes.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I know we talked a lot about. So it's interesting. This is kind of covering like a story arc, but we covered the strength ratios, practice to improve technique, and then kind of like the frequency involved. I know Dane Miller, so like I know he's a big influence kind of in the weightlifting world, and he has a course he put out, also a book where he talks about how he'll set up training. Maybe they do like variations of a snatch and a clean and jerk, and then they'll come in and do the competition lifts. They'll come in and do variations. Then they'll have like, a different day, but it follows a predictable pattern or cycle.
Yes.
Do you have a kind of like predictable pattern of, on Monday we'll snatch from the floor, Tuesday we'll snatch from a power position or a high block, and then do you have something you kind of use as a heuristic?
Certainly. Again, with the understanding that it is tailored to what each athlete needs.
Right.
There are people in the club who have definitely had overlaps in their training. For instance, we do a lot of snatch, grip, or mini deadlifts, and we do them with like people's toes being elevated so that they cannot use their knee joint and makes them work their hamstrings and their glutes more. So a lot of people get stuff like that. But on average, the people get the snatch and clean and jerk and accessories that they personally need. So I have some people like Jess Franklin. She snatches from the floor 3 days a week. Kristen Erickson snatches from the floor 1 day a week. As we get closer to a competition, it's 2 days a week. So yes, we do a lot of conjugate style training. We use blocks, we use hang work, we use different volumes, we use pauses in different positions, tailored to the athlete. Like if I got I've got a young kid, Neil. He's 16. He started the sport 2 years ago. He still gets pulled towards the bar right off the floor. So he'll do a lot of low hang clean and jerks to work on staying back, work on keeping his knees pushed out, work on not letting the distribution of weight in his foot shift. And he'll do that at like 75% for triples, and he might have that almost every cycle. So yes, there are predictable things. I mean, so the other thing too is everything we do is periodized, and not just within an individual training block, of course, but typically every athlete is on an 18-month plan. For everybody, not for everybody, for the people doing universities with the intent or the option to try to make that FISU team that's supposed to happen in Mexico, they started their program to get ready for this meet 16 months ago. So it was like a 17, 18 month plan. And it was blocked off. Obviously changes were made along the way. For instance, Jordan Bush, she got a very slight tear in her UCL. And that was early last year. So we had to shelve some things that were supposed to happen then. But everyone is both on a long-term program that encapsulates what are the most important meets over the next 18 months. And that's all about the reset after this year's senior nationals for the national team. And then a plan for each individual meet that they might do. That's an important meet. Local meets, obviously not. And even like series meets, and for some people, even American Open finals. So like for Jordan, she did American Open finals and she medaled, but we certainly didn't peak for it. She actually did a heavier clean and jerk at a local meet this past weekend. Again, in preparation for what was ultimately the most important meet in her calendar, which is the university championships. So yeah, we everything is periodized, everything is structured, it's tailored to the individual, and it's a lot of work on my part. And that's okay. This is my full-time job, and while I still write, and I'm working on a second book right now, which is actually my third book to be published, or will be when it gets published, I no longer do any of the editing work. I don't do much journalism anymore. That was mostly thanks to the shutdowns after the pandemic. But this is what I do, and I'm very privileged to have some really hardworking people come in and train with us, and I want to give them the best I can give them. So,
yeah, I think that's great, and I honestly think that's a great place to wrap up. But caveat that by saying I think a second show would be useful to dive more into one, like we kind of covered smaller bits of the training plan, but so maybe we cover longer term planning and then talk about the business side of things, making a transition from CrossFit gym to owning a gym, managing all the things that come along with that, how you can make yourself most effective in a space of like managing all components and parts of coaching. So if people listen to this and they're thinking to themselves, well, I want to check out more of Jim's stuff, Philadelphia Barbell, etc., where can we direct them so they can find all of that?
So we're having a website built right now to be able to add a lot more content, but mostly the Instagram. I think it's Philadelphia Barbell Club. Yeah, I have to always remember that it's the club is the end of it, because my email is just Philadelphia Barbell at Gmail. People can reach out. I would encourage anybody who has a question to just message me on Instagram. We have I guess it was last year or whatever, during the closure, I bought a sauna for the club, for the athletes to recover. So a lot of times I use it as often as I can, and I'll just sit in there and like respond to Instagram messages and stuff like that, and use it to get like minor chores done. But I would love it. We had a young coach from Florida reached out to me recently, and he just wanted to pick my brain for 45 minutes, and that was great. I did that. It's like so yeah. Feel free to like reach out.
Yeah. So hopefully everyone listening to this episode enjoyed the content. As Jim mentioned, reach out, pick his brain. We'll probably have him on for another show. So if there are any comments, questions, etc., you can either direct them my way or to him, and then we can cover them in the next episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Josh_PhilWL. That's PHILWL. And we will catch you on another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast.